world-class fighter, known for knocking out champions in the cage, just kicked a royal guard square in the face at Buckingham Palace. But what happened next? It wasn't just unexpected, it was unforgettable. Because that still soldier standing tall in the Queen's colors? He wasn't there to perform, he was trained to protect. And that fighter was about to learn a lesson he'd never forget. This isn't just a story about a fight. It's about honor, discipline, and the kind of strength that doesn't need to speak loudly. And in the next few minutes, you'll see what happens when ego meets military reality head on. But before we begin, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below. And if you believe in stories that celebrate real service, quiet strength, and powerful life lessons, hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and ring that bell icon so you never miss a story that truly matters. It was a crisp morning in London. The gates of Buckingham Palace had just opened. Tourists gathered to see tradition in action, the changing of the guard. But among them stood someone who didn't come to admire the ceremony. He came to challenge it. It was just after sunrise in London. The air was crisp, the cobblestones still damp from the early morning mist. Outside the gates of Buckingham Palace, a crowd had already begun to form, eager to witness one of the oldest military traditions in the world, the changing of the guard. Camera phones clicked, young children sat on their parents' shoulders, elderly tourists leaned against rails with soft smiles, remembering stories of old. This wasn't just sightseeing. For many, it felt like stepping into history. Standing motionless near the palace entrance was one of Her Majesty's royal guards. Dressed in a scarlet tunic, tall black boots, and that unmistakable bearskin cap, he stood perfectly still, an emblem of British discipline and military pride. Tourists admired him, whispered in awe, took respectful photos from a distance. But not everyone in the crowd came to observe with reverence. Oh man, standing out with his designer tracksuit and confident swagger, wasn't here for the tradition. His name was Tyler McCain, an American MMA fighter with 3 world titles and something to prove. At 34, he'd conquered fighters in every cage he entered. But today, he wasn't stepping into a ring. He was stepping into something far older and far more powerful than he expected. To Tyler, the royal guard looked more like a statue than a soldier. But behind that stillness stood a man with real battlefield experience. Someone trained not for sport, but for survival. Tyler McCain wasn't just a fighter. He was a spectacle. Standing 6'2" with shoulders built from years in the octagon, he had the posture of a man used to being the most dangerous person in the room. Hailing from Texas, Tyler had spent the last decade dominating the world of mixed martial arts. 3-time international champion, owner of a chain of elite gyms across the South, known for knockout finishes and a reputation for pushing the limits inside the cage. Tyler thrived on competition and fame. But that morning, standing among the quiet crowd outside Buckingham Palace, Tyler didn't see the reverence others felt. He didn't hear the silence between the ceremonial footsteps. What he saw was an opportunity. "This is what they call security?" he muttered loud enough for those nearby to hear. His voice carried a smirk, eyes fixed on the guard who hadn't moved an inch. "Where I come from, someone standing that still is just asking to get dropped." Some in the crowd turned. A few chuckled nervously. Others frowned, recognizing the unmistakable air of a man looking to provoke. Taylor's entourage, 4 men wearing matching black jackets labeled Iron Limit Combat Systems, formed a loose circle around him. Fighters in their own right, they nodded in approval as Tyler stretched his arms and rolled his shoulders. "Come on," one of them said, grinning. "Remember Tokyo last year? That Swedish champ didn't last 40 seconds against you." Tyler smiled, confidence pulsing from every movement. He'd fought the best and beaten them. In his world, reflex was everything, and the stillness of the royal guard? To him, that wasn't strength, it was weakness. He began pacing slowly, circling the guard like a predator testing the edge of its cage. Sergeant Edward Langford, still a stone, stood unfazed, his eyes forward, his breathing calm. Tyler threw a few light punches in the air, jabs, hooks, a low kick, just enough to draw attention. The crowd had shifted now. What was supposed to be a peaceful ceremony was becoming something else entirely. Some were intrigued, others looked concerned. And then Tyler crossed a silent line. Elm stepped into Langford's personal space. Inches away from the guard's face, he whispered mockingly, "What are you going to do? Blink me to death?" The guard didn't react, didn't even flinch. Tyler laughed, but not everyone did. Among the crowd stood a man who had seen more than a few confrontations in his day. Colonel James David, a retired Royal Marine. The colonel's jaw tightened. He had seen that look before. Arrogance, the kind that forgets respect until it's too late. Tyler stepped back, adjusted his stance, and looked at his team. "Let's give these folks a little demo," he said. What he didn't know was that the man standing in front of him wasn't a prop. He was a soldier, a veteran, a professional, trained not for applause, but for war. While Tyler McCain moved like a showman, flashy, fast, loud, Sergeant Edward Langford stood like the embodiment of something far older. Still, silent, resolute. At 28 years old, Langford had already lived through more than most men twice his age. He wasn't just standing guard to pose for tourists. He had earned that position through years of grueling military service. 3 tours across Afghanistan and Syria, a special reconnaissance regiment, decorated for valor. And now he stood beneath the shadows of Buckingham Palace, on ceremonial duty, yes, but with the same discipline that had kept him alive in far darker places. To the casual eye, Langford might have looked like a statue in a red tunic, but inside every muscle was tuned, every breath measured. Because in his world, the stillness wasn't passive. It was purpose. Had stood through heat waves, pouring rain, protests and jeers, never breaking posture, never reacting to provocation, because that's what the uniform demands. And that's what Langford embodied. But as Tyler McCain circled closer, something shifted. Langford recognized the pattern, the swagger, the calculated provocation. He'd seen it before, not from tourists, but from men in cities far from home, men whose intentions weren't for show, in places where the cost of reacting late was paid in blood. Hell didn't need to glance at Tyler to know the man was testing limits. The change in the crowd, the aggressive tone, the tension in the air, Langford felt it all. But he didn't move. Not yet. A few yards away, Colonel James David watched with quiet concern. Though dressed in civilian clothes, the weight of his experience hung in the air like a flag in windless silence. He knew the guard wasn't just a figurehead. He knew exactly what Langford was capable of. And he also knew the strict code that bound him in place. Langford's mission was restraint, until it could no longer be afforded. Tyler stepped closer again, now practically nose to nose with the soldier. He threw a fast series of jabs in the air, just inches from Langford's face, drawing gasps from the onlookers. "He's not even blinking," Tyler joked loudly. "You see that, folks? That's not bravery, that's fear." He's not allowed to respond. Langford's eyes never moved, but inside, the switch had been flipped. His breathing slowed further, his stance anchored deeper, because Langford wasn't afraid. He was waiting, watching, calculating, and if Tyler made one more wrong move, he would learn that stillness isn't the absence of power, it's the containment of it. The crowd had grown quiet. Even the children who had been laughing earlier were now clinging to their parents. Something had shifted. What began as a playful morning in front of Buckingham Palace had become a moment on the edge. Tyler McCain, hands on hips, looked around with the confidence of a man used to being the center of attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, raising his voice like a ring announcer, "what you're witnessing right now is the difference between ceremony and combat, between posturing and performance." The crowd murmured. Some tourists, unsure of what was happening, began backing away. Others pulled out their phones ready to film, still unaware they were about to witness something far more real than they expected. Tyler's entourage formed a wide semicircle, deliberately blocking off the space. With their matching black jackets and athletic builds, they looked like a fight team prepping for an exhibition. Except this wasn't a cage. This was royal ground, and the man at the center of it wasn't an opponent. He was a guard. Sergeant Edward Langford still hadn't moved. Not even a glance. His tall frame, clad in scarlet red, remained upright and perfectly composed, but inside the soldier was already adjusting, preparing for the inevitable breach. Colonel James David took a single step forward from the crowd. His eyes locked on Tyler's group. His gut told him exactly what was about to happen, and he knew it couldn't be stopped in time. Tyler stepped into position, bouncing lightly on the balls of his feet. His arms were loose, shoulders relaxed. Years of muscle memory kicked in. "Let's show them how a real fighter moves," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. Then came the moment. One fluid motion. Tyler spun, and with the precision of a champion striker, he launched a spinning heel kick aimed square at Langford's face. Crack. The impact echoed through the courtyard like a firecracker. Gasps erupted from the onlookers. The iconic bearskin cap flew off Langford's head, spiraling into the air before landing with a dull thud on the stone path. Tyler landed gracefully, grinning as he turned back toward the crowd. He began to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Because Langford hadn't fallen. His head had snapped with the blow, blood now visible on his temple. But he was still standing. Instead, unmoved. And for the first time that morning, he turned his eyes toward Tyler. What Tyler saw in that gaze was not shock, not pain, but a quiet, focused clarity that only a man who had stared down gunfire could carry. Tyler's grin faltered. Okay, one of his teammates whispered. Even they knew this wasn't going the way they'd expected. Colonel David stopped mid-step. His concern had hardened into something else. A kind of calm anticipation. He'd seen this before, right before things got real. Then Langford moved. He dropped his rifle in one motion. Ceremony over. And in the span of a single breath, he closed the distance between him and Tyler. Tyler's instincts kicked in. He raised his guard, dropped into a stance. "Now we're talking," he said, forcing confidence into his voice. But Langford didn't banter. He didn't perform. He was struck. Not with flair, but with precision. A shoulder check that rocked Tyler off balance. A takedown that brought him to the ground in a heartbeat. And a knee planted firmly across the fighter's chest, holding him still but not injured. Every move Langford made had been honed through real combat training. No wasted energy, no emotion, just mission, focus. Tyler struggled, but every attempt to counter was met with quiet, subtle adjustments. His world of tournaments, trophies, and cheering fans meant nothing here. Langford finally spoke. Just 3 words, delivered with calm authority. "This ends now." And it did. Tyler McCain had trained with champions. He'd fought in arenas packed with roaring crowds, under the lights, the cameras, the banners. But now he lay on his back in a silent courtyard, breathing hard, pinned under the steady weight of a man he didn't understand. That man, Sergeant Edward Langford, was no longer holding a ceremonial rifle, no longer a tourist attraction. He was what he had always been, a combat-tested soldier. The crowd stood still. Even the children who had cried out at the noise had gone quiet. Some lowered their phones, others simply watched, too stunned to move. Colonel James David stepped forward through the gathered tourists. Though long retired from active duty, his military bearing hadn't dulled. The medals discreetly pinned to his lapel caught the light as he approached. One of Tyler's teammates tried to intercept him, hand extended in protest. "Let the demonstration finish, old-timer," he said, voice forced and unsure. But David didn't stop. His eyes met Langford's, then turned to Tyler. "You've made a mistake, son," the colonel said. "And you're lucky this man still has the discipline to show restraint." Langford's knee remained in place, not with anger, but with control. His breathing was even, his face was calm, save for the thin streak of blood trickling from his temple. Tyler, chest heaving, tried to speak. You can't just..." But Colonel David cut him off with a quiet firmness that commanded attention. "Sergeant Langford served with the Special Reconnaissance Regiment," he said. 3 combat deployments, 2 commendations for valor, night operations in Syria, counterinsurgency missions in Afghanistan. I paused, letting the weight of those words settle. And now he stands guard, not because he has to, but because he's earned that honor. The crowd began to shift. You could see it in their faces, a dawning understanding that the man they had mistaken for a living statue was in fact a warrior, a professional, and perhaps the most dangerous person in the square that day. Palace security began arriving, their radios crackling, their boots moving quickly across the courtyard. One officer approached David with quiet urgency. "Colonel, sir, we'll take it from here." David nodded. "Sergeant Langford has the situation in hand." Then, with the faintest smile, he added, "Though I believe Mr. McCain here might finally appreciate who he just tried to test." Langford glanced toward his commanding officer, received a subtle nod, and slowly rose from his position. He didn't look to the crowd, didn't gloat. He simply returned to attention, blood still visible on his face, posture unbroken. Tyler remained on the ground a moment longer, breathing deeply, his pride bruised more than his body. Around him, the crowd gave Langford space, no longer just watching, but respecting. The security officer turned to David. "He's requesting to speak with the guard. Said he wants to apologize properly." David glanced at Langford. The sergeant didn't move his head, but his commanding officer understood the signal. A near imperceptible nod. "That can be arranged," David said, "when his shift ends. But I suspect that conversation will feel very different than the one he tried to start this morning." As the crowd dispersed and calm returned to the courtyard, Colonel David addressed those who lingered. "To stand motionless in the face of ridicule takes more courage than most understand. The discipline you saw here today? That's not for show. That's the same discipline these men carry into battle, and the same strength that holds the line when others break." An older woman in the crowd, her husband's veteran pin glinting on her lapel, wiped away a tear. Not from fear, from pride. Time seemed to freeze. The bearskin cap landed on the stone courtyard with a soft thud. The silence that followed felt louder than the crack of the kick itself. Tyler McCain straightened up, his mouth already curling into a triumphant smile. He turned slightly, expecting applause, or at least awe, but all he got was silence. And then he noticed something. The guard, Sergeant Edward Langford, was still standing. Blood ran slowly down his temple, a stark line of crimson against the pale skin of his face. His head had snapped with the force of the kick, yes, but his feet never moved. His frame never wavered. And now, for the very first time, he looked directly at Tyler. There was no rage in Langford's eyes, no panic, just a focused stillness, the kind born from years of real combat, not competition. What Tyler saw wasn't pain, it was calculation. Almost Tyler's teammates whispered under his breath. Uh-oh. Then Langford moved. With one precise motion, he let go of his ceremonial rifle. The metal clattered on the stones at his feet. The ceremony was over. What followed wasn't flashy. There were no spinning kicks, no crowd-pleasing theatrics. Only controlled violence, the kind that doesn't aim to impress but to end a threat. Langford stepped forward, bridging the distance between them in less than a second. Tyler, to his credit, reacted quickly, falling back on years of training, shifting into a defensive stance. "Now we're talking," he shouted, his voice straining to sound confident. But this wasn't the cage. There were no rules here, no referees, no points. Langford's first strike was a close-range palm thrust, right to Tyler's sternum. It didn't knock him down, but it rocked him. Tyler stumbled backward 2 full steps. Langford didn't follow with a flurry of punches. He didn't need to. Every move was measured, every step purposeful. His training wasn't built on spectacle. It was built on survival. Tyler launched a low kick, a technique that had ended dozens of matches. Langford caught it mid-air with unsettling ease. And with one swift motion, he swept Tyler's other leg out from under him and brought him down, hard. The wind left Tyler's lungs in a single gasp. Before he could recover, Langford had already placed a knee across his chest. Firm, but not cruel. The crowd was stunned into silence. Even palace security, already en route, slowed for just a moment to process what they were seeing. Langford didn't look to the crowd, didn't raise his hands, didn't speak until now. 3 words: calm, clear, controlled. This ends now. Tyler lay on the cold stones, looking up at the sky, gasping for air and trying to process how quickly everything had unraveled. All that training, all that bravado, all the championships. And yet, in front of a silent crowd at Buckingham Palace, he had been outmatched in every way that mattered. Langford's breathing remained steady. His face, despite the blood, remained neutral. His expression, more fitting for a soldier executing orders than a man who had just been assaulted. He wasn't angry. He wasn't proud. He was simply doing what needed to be done. The moment lingered like the last note of a hymn. Tyler McCain lay on the stone courtyard, his breath ragged, eyes wide. Sergeant Edward Langford stood above him. Not triumphant, not proud, simply calm, collected, and once again silent. The tourists who had once chuckled at Tyler's antics now stood frozen. Their expressions changed. This was no longer amusing. The man they had laughed with had just been brought to the ground, not by showmanship, but by skill, by training, by something far deeper than any of them had expected. Colonel James David stepped forward again, not as a bystander, but as a voice of quiet authority. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his eyes sweeping across the silent crowd, "what you've just witnessed was not a brawl. It was restraint, professional restraint." Hal turned slightly, gesturing toward Langford, who had resumed parade rest. Blood still streaked his temple, but he stood tall, like nothing had happened. But everyone now understood. Something had. "This is Sergeant Edward Langford, Royal Guard, yes, but also a veteran of multiple combat deployments. Special Reconnaissance Regiment, Afghanistan. Syria, decorated for bravery under fire." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman near the front lowered her phone. An elderly man with a veteran's cap placed his hand respectfully over his heart. "This uniform doesn't make the man," David continued, "but in this case it reflects exactly who he is. A soldier, a protector, someone who has earned the right to stand still, because he's already proven he can stand strong." The crowd seemed to breathe again, this time with reverence. They looked at Langford not as a performer, but as a warrior. Not as a man in costume, but a man who had earned every thread of it. Palace security moved in quietly, surrounding Tyler and his entourage. But there was no resistance now, no banter, just silence. A security officer nodded to Colonel David. "We'll handle it from here, sir. He's being charged. Assaulting a soldier on duty, disrupting a ceremonial operation." David nodded, as he should be. Let it be a reminder to everyone. The men who stand silent often carry the loudest truths. Langford gave a nearly imperceptible nod to his commanding officer. He bent slowly to retrieve his fallen bearskin cap, adjusted it with dignity, and returned to his post, as though nothing had happened, as though everything had. The crowd had dispersed. The courtyard had returned to its quiet, ceremonial rhythm. But in the small, nondescript room inside the palace security wing, something more personal was taking place. Tyler McCain, once a proud champion, now sat in silence. His designer tracksuit was creased, his knuckles were scraped from the brief scuffle, but the real bruising was internal, on his pride, on his certainty, on everything he thought he understood about strength. Had requested one thing before being formally processed by authorities: a moment, just one, with the man he had kicked. A quiet knock on the door. Then it opened. Sergeant Edward Langford stepped in, now wearing his standard duty fatigues. The ceremonial tunic was gone, but the posture, the discipline, remained the same. For a long second, neither man spoke. Then Tyler stood, clearing his throat. I need to say something," he began. His voice was quieter now, stripped of bravado. "What I did back there wasn't just disrespectful, it was ignorant." Langford said nothing but nodded for him to continue. "When I saw you standing there, I didn't see the man behind the uniform. I saw a target, a prop. I thought if you didn't move, you couldn't fight. I was wrong on every level." Langford's face remained neutral, but his eyes softened, just slightly. "Where I come from," Tyler went on, "it's all about showing what you've got. Flash, power, timing. But you didn't need any of that. You didn't flinch, you didn't react, you waited until it mattered." Sh looked down, the weight of his failure hanging on his shoulders. "And when it did matter, you taught me a lesson. I won't forget." Langford finally spoke. His tone was steady, almost quiet. "Most people never see what's behind the stillness. That's by design. But when someone forces our hand, we respond." Tyler nodded. "You could have hurt me, but you didn't. You controlled it, all of it. That takes more strength than I've ever shown in the ring." Langford offered a simple reply. "Control isn't just about fighting. It's about not fighting until it becomes necessary." The two men locked eyes for a brief moment, two warriors from different worlds finding rare common ground in humility and respect. "For what it's worth," Tyler said, offering his hand, "I'm sorry, not just for the kick, but for not seeing you as a fellow professional." Langford looked at the hand, then took it in a firm, wordless handshake. No ceremony, no forgiveness speech, just mutual understanding. Then Langford turned and left, his duty not yet finished. And Tyler? He was no longer just a fighter. He was a man learning what it really means to stand still, and what kind of strength that takes. There's something about this story that stays with you, not because of the fight, but because of what it revealed about character, control, and the kind of strength that doesn't need to shout. In today's world, we're often told to act fast, speak louder, and always stand out. But sometimes it's the person who says nothing, the one who holds steady, who shows us the true meaning of discipline and purpose. Sergeant Edward Langford didn't need to prove anything. He didn't raise his voice or throw the first punch. He stood still, not out of fear, but out of duty. And when the moment came, he acted with just enough force to restore order, not to seek revenge. That kind of self-restraint is a rare form of strength, and in a world growing louder every day, it might just be the kind we need more of. So if there's a lesson in all of this, it's this: never mistake stillness for weakness, and never assume that silence means someone has nothing to say. Often, it means they've already seen more than they care to share. We'd love to hear your thoughts. On a scale of 1 to 10, how powerful was this story for you? What part stood out the most? Leave a comment below, we read every one. And if this story touched your heart or made you reflect, please give it a like. Subscribe to our channel for more true stories that honor service, sacrifice, and quiet strength. And don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss a new video that matters. Because sometimes the most powerful message is the one spoken without a single word.